The clear framework gives you a structure for building arguments that are both logical and persuasive. Let me walk you through each element with concrete examples because understanding how to apply this framework properly is crucial for effective communication. Claim means stating your position clearly and specifically. This is harder than it sounds because we often think we're being clear when we're actually being quite vague. Don't make people guess what you're arguing for. Instead of saying, we need to do something about climate change, which could mean anything from recycling more to completely restructuring the economy, say something specific like, I believe we should implement a carbon tax starting at £20 per tonne of carbon dioxide because it's the most efficient way to reduce emissions whilst allowing the market to find the best solutions. Notice the difference. The first statement leaves people wondering what exactly you want them to do. The second gives them a specific policy proposal they can engage with. Here's another example. Instead of education needs reform, try I think we should reduce class sizes to no more than 20 students because smaller classes allow teachers to give more individual attention to each child. Next, we have L, logic. And this is where you explain your reasoning step by step. Why does your claim make sense? What's the chain of thinking that leads from your evidence to your conclusion? For the carbon tax example, when we put a price on carbon emissions, it creates market incentives for businesses to invest in cleaner technologies and more efficient processes. Companies will naturally look for ways to reduce their carbon costs, which means reducing their emissions. This harnesses the power of the market rather than trying to regulate every specific behavior. For the class size example, when teachers have fewer students, they can spend more time understanding each child's learning needs, provide more detailed feedback on their work, and catch the problem early before something becomes serious. This individual attention is particularly important for children who learn differently or come from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, E for evidence. Evidence supports your logic with facts, data, examples, or credible expert opinions. This is where you prove that your reasoning actually works in practice. For the carbon tax in British Columbia, their carbon tax led to 5 to 15% reduction in emission, whilst the province maintained economic growth comparable to the rest of Canada. Similar results have been seen in Sweden, which has had a carbon tax since 1991 and now has some of the lowest per capita emissions in the developed world whilst maintaining a strong economy. If we're talking about class sizes, we could say research by Professor Alan Kruger at Princeton found that students in smaller classes scored significantly higher on standardized tests, and the benefits were particularly strong for minority or low-income students. Tennessee's class size reduction experiment in the 80s showed similar results with effects lasting well into students' adult life. Then we have assumptions. And this is the part most people skip, but it's crucial. And it means acknowledging the underlying beliefs your argument relies on. For the example of carbon tax, this approach assumes that the market mechanisms are genuinely effective tools for environmental policy, that businesses will respond predictably to price signals rather than just absorbing costs, and that we can design the system to avoid unfairly burdening low-income families. Related to class sizes, this assumes that individual attention from teachers is a key factor in student learning, that we can hire enough qualified teachers to staff smaller classes, and that the benefits justify the significant additional costs involved. Why is acknowledging assumptions so important? because these are often where disagreements actually lie. Someone might accept your evidence but disagree with your underlying assumptions. When you make these explicit, you can have a more honest conversation about the real points of disagreement. Then we have R for responses, and this means addressing the concerns or counter arguments that the other person is likely to have. And this is where your listening skills become crucial. You need to address their actual concerns, not just the objections you find easiest to dismiss. For the carbon tax example, say, I know there are concerns about the impact on low-income families who spend a larger portion of their income on energy. I think that can be addressed through targeted rebates or tax credits that ensure these families are actually better off overall. There are also concerns about competitiveness if other countries don't have similar policies, which is why I think we need to work towards international coordination on carbon prices. And then for the example of class sizes, I understand the concern about costs. Hiring more teachers and building more classrooms requires significant investment. However, the long-term economic benefits of better educated citizens typically outweigh these upfront costs. For places where teacher shortages are a problem, we might need to phase in smaller classes gradually whilst we work on training and recruiting more teachers. Notice how this framework naturally incorporates what you've learned through listening. You can address their specific concerns in the responses section because you've taken the time to understand what they're actually worried about. You're not just making your case in a vacuum. You're engaging with their perspective whilst presenting your own.